It started like a quiet afternoon by the water. The sun shimmered across the lake, a place of peace that had belonged to one man's family for generations. Derek Williams had grown up by this shoreline, casting lines with his father, watching sunsets fade into the still water. To him, the lake wasn't just water and soil, it was history, legacy, and home. But to some in the neighborhood, it was simply a backdrop to their leisure, a space they assumed they controlled. That's when she appeared. Karen Miller, head of the local HOA, her footsteps sharp against the dock, her eyes narrowed as they locked onto Derek's boat. She didn't see a rightful owner. She didn't see a man protecting his family's land. She only saw someone she thought didn't belong. Her demand was simple, yet loaded with centuries of entitlement. Move your boat. What she didn't know was that the water she claimed to govern wasn't hers to command. And soon, the entire community would find out just how wrong they had been. Derek Williams was no outsider. In fact, his life was woven into the very fabric of the lake. He was a successful entrepreneur, a father of two, and the quiet guardian of land that had been passed down for 3 generations. His grandfather had fought tooth and nail to preserve ownership during a time when laws and prejudice threatened to strip black families of every inch of property they built. That fight was never forgotten, and now Derek carried it forward, safeguarding the lake not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in legacy and dignity. To most, Derek blended easily into the rhythms of suburban life. He was the man who waved while mowing his lawn, who fixed his own boat engine on Saturday mornings, who kept to himself but always treated neighbors with respect. The lake was his sanctuary. He'd rise before dawn, coffee in hand, and watch the fog lift off the water as though it whispered stories from his ancestors. Here he felt at peace, rooted. But peace is fragile when entitlement lurks nearby. The HOA, led by Karen Miller, had grown accustomed to treating the lake as its playground. Fishing clubs met every weekend. Parties spilt out onto the shoreline, and rules were made without ever consulting the man who actually owned it all. To them, Derek was invisible until his presence challenged their illusion of control. And when his boat rested in a spot Karen believed she managed, the storm began to build. It started with whispers. Karen's sharp voice carried across the dock, muttering about rules and proper procedures. Other HOA members joined in, their eyes darting toward Derek as though he were trespassing in his own home. Phones came out, photos snapped, not to capture the beauty of the lake, but to document a supposed violation. The entitlement grew louder, each complaint sharpening into something heavier than just neighborhood politics. It became personal, targeted, racial. Derek stood calm, shoulders squared, as Karen marched up with her familiar air of superiority. She pointed at the boat, accusing, demanding. Around them, HOA members nodded, emboldened by her confidence. But Derek's silence carried weight. It was the silence of a man who knew truth didn't need shouting. He listened as accusations flew, as the crowd gathered like they always did. Quick to judge, quick to assume. The hostility thickened, turning from a simple dispute to something darker. Karen spoke of fines, of removal, of consequences. The fishing club members rallied, voices echoing across the water. To them, Derek was in the wrong simply because they believed they owned the narrative. What none of them realized was that the ground they stood on, the lake they fished in, the clubhouse they claimed, was his. Every paper, every deed, every legal right bore his family's name. And when the moment came when Karen pushed too far, Derek decided silence was no longer enough. The air grew still as Derek reached calmly into his folder. The crowd leaned forward, expecting excuses, maybe flimsy paperwork. Instead, he unfolded official documents, deeds, stamped and signed, proving in no uncertain terms that the lake, the dock, and the clubhouse all belonged to him. Gasps rippled through the group. Karen's smirk faltered, her certainty dissolving into shock. Her finger, once raised with authority, dropped to her side. The silence was deafening. HOA members exchanged uneasy glances, their self-assurance cracking. The fishing club, so vocal minutes earlier, stood frozen, their rods hanging uselessly at their sides. And Derek, steady, unshaken, posted a notice on the clubhouse wall. Eviction. The fishing club, effective immediately, had no rights to the lake. Karen's face flushed pale, her authority collapsing in front of everyone she sought to impress. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. No longer the man accused, Derek, was the rightful owner, revealing the truth. And in that truth, every ounce of prejudice and entitlement was exposed for what it really was. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, whispers traveled beyond the neighborhood, through town meetings and social circles. The story wasn't just about a man defending his boat. It was about a black man reminding a community that ownership, legacy, and respect weren't negotiable. The fishing club was gone, its gatherings silenced. The clubhouse stood quiet, no longer a hub of exclusion, but a reminder of arrogance met with truth. For Derek, it was more than winning a dispute. It was honoring his grandfather's fight, proving that resilience could outlast centuries of doubt. Sitting on the dock at sunset, he reflected on what had unfolded. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't needed to. The documents spoke louder than anger ever could. And in that silence, dignity had prevailed. But the impact stretched further. Younger families in the community saw Derek not just as a neighbor, but as an example of quiet strength in the face of injustice. His story reminded them that power doesn't always shout. It sometimes waits, patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. And for Karen, the woman who once demanded his boat be moved, her fall from authority served as a cautionary tale of entitlement crumbling under truth. The lake remained still, reflecting the sky as it always had. But now it reflected something more, a reminder that respect cannot be taken, only given. And as Derek steered his boat into the horizon, one question lingered in the air for everyone who had watched the events unfold. How many times will we mistake ownership for privilege? And how many more lessons will it take before we finally learn?